Welcome back, APUSH students. Today is chapter 31 of the American Pageant, titled The Politics of Boom and Bust. If you don't know the American Pageant, it's fine because the content is still going to be the same. I'm going to be going over all the key terms and notes for this chapter that helped me get a 5, so I encourage you to take notes along as well. Adkins vs. Children's Hospital, an invalidated female protection in the workplace. This was a court case. It reversed the previous decision of Mueller v. Oregon, effectively eliminating protections for underprivileged populations in the workplace and getting rid of the minimum wage law for women. The decision fits into the long debate of how to handle gender differences between women and men, which will continue for the rest of time. Not only is it about just the gender debate, but it's also a labor issue. This is the court kind of pulling back certain labor reforms and labor union goals. Warren G. Harding, soft president elected after Woodrow Wilson. He was afraid to take any action of importance or meaningfulness, which often got him taken advantage of by more aggressive figures. His cabinet and Supreme Court justices pursued aggressive conservative action against progressive legislation and made in the previous decades. His lack of willingness to take action rears its head more as we get closer to the Great Depression. Washington Disarmament Conference about stopping the expansion of the Navy. It binded the United States, Britain, Japan, and China on a smaller level to each other through numerous deals. They agreed to not only keep an even navy, but also to disarm possessions far away in the east to keep peace. Unfortunately, the deals were not well backed up and became empty promises. This leads into World War II, where none of this really ends up mattering at all. Kellogg-Briand Pact, agreement to only fight a defensive war. It was a noble idea that displayed American diplomacy and peace, but in reality it was written with many loopholes that any war aggressor could bypass to achieve justification for war. In reality, it displayed the American ability to go under a false sense of security through words rather than action, which will lead to further troubles. This passiveness also starts to show itself again with Hitler, where some of the actions he was taking before World War II really broke out, America kind of ignored and thought it wouldn't lead to anything, and that's just kind of a theme that came out between World War I and World War II. Teapot Dome scandal where government accepted bribes for oil field leases. It revealed to the public the failures of the government and further disillusionment towards existing systems. The acquittal of the bribers also created disappointment towards the courts. Overall, it is a symbol of the dark side of the 1920s, just the Gilded Age and corruption and money. This scandal goes a lot deeper than just like an oil field thing. It does not really matter to know all the details for like APUSH or anything, but it is very interesting, so I encourage anyone to like watch a more fulfilling video on it. McNary-Hagen bill encouraged government to buy up crops to keep prices high. This is just government meddling in the free market. It was a bill that fit into an entire plan supposed to make farmers happy, but when Coolidge vetoed it twice, Coolidge is another president after Harding, it kept farmers' political anger high. Their anger came out in the election of 1924 when progressive Robert La Follette amassed 5 billion votes. It's not like he won the presidency or anything, but you could see how populist movements among the farmers were starting to rise because of events like these. Dawes plan that allowed American money to cycle through Germany and the Allies, then back to the United States. The plan made debt repayments rely on American credit as private American loans funded Germany's reparations and the Allies' payment to the US government. When the Great Depression hit years later, this plan became a central reason that the world's economy was destroyed. So a lot of Europe recovering from World War II was tied to America's economy because of the Dawes plan. So when America fell apart in the Great Depression, it sparked just a world economic drought. Agricultural Marketing Act meant to help farmers. It established a government board receiving federal funds, which they would put back into the agricultural market to create American surpluses of crops. The board encouraged the creation of farmers' organizations to distribute the funds. So going back to the other kind of populist farmers movement, there's definitely an effort here for the government and the farmers to try and find some mutual way for the farming and agricultural industry to thrive. Hawley-Smoot tariff raised tariffs to the highest rate ever. The protective tariff was meant to protect American agriculture domestically, although it was made so high that it actually hurt farmers. It reversed the trend of pro-foreign lowered tariffs and increased economic isolationism, exacerbating the worldwide depression. So it hurt farmers because beyond just selling their crops, they now could just buy basic goods and like needs for themselves and what they needed to run their farm and just to live. So raising tariffs super high didn't accomplish much, and the whole principle of raising tariffs themselves is just about economic isolationism, and as the world starts to section itself off economically, you lead to the Great Depression. Black Tuesday, the day where people sold all their stocks, the stock market crash. This caused the rapid deflation of all stock prices as so many were sold off. This global stock market crash is marked as the official start of the Great Depression. Brother, Can You Spare a Dime, song that captures the mood of the Depression. It replaced a song that was originally named about money rolling in, and it shows how poor people in America were. The word brother reveals the sense of connection among the jobless poor class developed during the Depression, which could influence political change in the future. The Great Depression would become a massive moment. A whole government was basically restructured, but we'll get into that in further chapters. Hoovervilles, shanty towns for poor people during the Depression. The suffering that was evident in these places spoke to the true despair of the Great Depression. Society being reduced to living in these conditions symbolized the threat of the Depression on the social and political structures of the country. So even though it's a decent amount into the 1930s, America and the whole world is very modern. The Great Depression was pretty brutal on everyone's living standards, and it's something that you never want anyone to go through, and the Hoovervilles kind of symbolize that. Even though we're now in modern America and all that, it was still very bad for the people living under this economic crash. Reconstruction Finance Corporation, bank meant to provide depression relief through indirect ways. Its indirect involvement in aiding the economy bypassed the socialist rhetoric and made sure not to give out any personal loans to avoid government handouts. Although it was passed a bit late, it helped greatly in getting people back on their feet by loaning money to all necessary economic institutions like banks and railroads. But the socialist rhetoric would definitely pick up later as the New Deal comes in. Norris LaGuardia Anti-Injunction Act helped unions and supported strikes, boycotts, and peaceful protest. Altogether, it greatly impacted the labor movement by outlawing unfair employer contracts that were anti-unionist and forbade courts to intervene on lawful strikes and labor protests. It also allowed the labor movement more freedom to push for what they want. So overall, just a massive win for the labor movement. Bonus Army, war veterans who demanded the government to assist them. They represented the masses of suffering veterans through their fierce and bold protests right in Washington, D.C. Their protests were dangerous and unsanitary, but they were necessary to capture the attention of the government. So not only was this a veterans sort of World War I issue, but it was obviously tied to the Great Depression with the economic crash and how that was affecting veterans. Japanese invasion of Manchuria, Japan's imperial invasion on China during the Depression. Their capitalization on the Depression showed how the Depression had weakened the Western world's authority and was giving way to foreign powers like Japan, and foreshadowed Germany's rise. So obviously China's not in like the Western hemisphere, but America had a lot of influence over China at the time. China, unlike today, was sort of an ally to America, and Japan kind of, since America was obviously focusing on their own problems, Japan was able to come in and take over China. America's lack of interest to get involved showed their isolationism that developed during the economic downturn. Good neighbor policy, Hoover's policy of limiting indirect imperialism. It showed how the economic crisis limited America's power to reach over other nations, and how they had to shift their foreign policy to not be as imperialist or as aggressive. So definitely retreat to the isolationism, not because they wanted to, but sort of because they had to, because they had their economic issues they needed to deal with. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next chapter, and goodbye.